Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing craft and creative business. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn and this is episode 873 of the podcast, and it is Monday the 13th of July 2026 as I record this. In today's special show, I'm talking about why the podcast is moving to Wednesdays and 7 tips for sustainable creativity. So let's get into it. So yes, this is my big news. After more than a decade of releasing this show on Monday mornings, I'm moving it to Wednesday mornings, and this is the first episode of the new time slot. Now, on the one hand, this might sound like nothing at all, but it's also a big deal for you and for me. I know many of you have a routine of listening to the show during a certain time slot on a Monday, so I'm sorry to have to disrupt that, and I hope I don't lose you along the way. Although I guess you could just save the Wednesday episode for Monday if you like. For me, it is a much bigger deal because a Monday show has meant that I have often recorded the intro and edited and scheduled the episode over the weekend for a decade. The main reason is that I need to record in the mornings when I have energy and when the house is less noisy, as Jonathan is often on the phone on a weekday since he works from home as well. So I would often prepare the episode on Fridays and I type out this introduction before reading it, and I do source the news and my thoughts and all of that. So sometimes preparing the episode and typing out these notes and everything might take a couple of hours anyway to prepare it. And then I would record it on Saturday morning or Sunday morning if Saturday was busy. And so recently I've really felt like something needed to change, and I have a thing that comes up every now and then in my Things app, which is where I put all my notes. It says, don't burn it all down. I'm sure many of you know how that feels. Like sometimes we think, I need to change things. I know, I'll just turn everything off and throw it all away and burn it all down. But that is not what I want to do with this show. So when I was thinking about this, I just thought I could move it to Wednesdays. And that means I can prep on Monday and Tuesday and not have a weekend having to work in the business. Now, those of you who run your own business understand that you're never really off. There's always something to do in a business. But if I could just move this to a Wednesday, it might mean that I free up some much needed time. So instead of going to ad hoc episodes or once every 2 weeks, which I also considered, I hope that moving to Wednesday makes the show more sustainable. Because let's face it, there's a lot going on. If I did move to a show every 2 weeks, I might have to make them longer anyway to get through everything. So it will be the same show, just on Wednesdays from now on. And this, as I said, is the first episode of the new way we do things around here. And it also underscores what today's episode is about, which is sustainable creativity over the long term. How do you keep writing, publishing, podcasting, whatever you do? How do you keep creating for years? And I am now at 2 decades. I think I've come close to burning out, but I have not burned out. And I know what burnout feels like because in the year 2000, well, pretty much by the end of 1999, I was burned out. So burned out, I did burn it all down. And I left London and went and sat in the desert of Western Australia and completely changed my life. So I know what burnout feels like. This is not it, but it does feel like I need something to change. And we don't want to become a slave to the algorithm, a slave to the market, a slave to your audience. You don't want that. You want to be able to serve your audience with a positive, happy mindset. And the goal is not just to survive this year's release schedule or keep feeding the machine until you crumble under the speed of it all and all the weight of expectation. The goal is to enjoy it and still be enjoying it next month, next year, in 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30. I'm only 51. So who knows how many years we all have left, but for sure we are not machines. We are not generative AI. We cannot churn it out. And what is the point of that anyway? So in today's show, I'll share some thoughts and tips from me and also other people from the show on this topic. And you can find the full episodes in the backlist as I share the clips and things. I will also share the number. And as ever, if you go to thecreativepenn.com/podcast, you'll find the links to the show notes for every episode, and you can always go back and listen or read the transcript. So let's get into it. 1. Take time out to question what you're doing. In early 2024, the Tim Ferriss Show, one of the biggest podcasts in the world, hit its 10-year anniversary with over 1 billion downloads and over 750 episodes, and Tim decided to take what he called a sabbatical. He paused the show for 4 months to seriously question whether or not to continue. Not because it was failing, it was hugely profitable, remains hugely profitable, and he enjoyed talking to people, but the landscape has clearly changed. Now, podcasting has gone from a wide open space when he started the show in 2014 to a now very saturated market. And his question wasn't, can I keep competing? It was, is this still the game I want to play? And just a little note here, I started the Creative Penn podcast in 2009 when there were even fewer shows. There were about 3 writing shows at that point. And so I know a lot about a changing podcast market. And in fact, I was a listener of Tim's show when it initially started, when he and Kevin Rose did a random show and they talked about Tim Talk, which was what he had originally maybe was going to call the show. So I do remember that. Anyway, after 4 months, Tim came back from his sabbatical with a blog post on my new rules for podcasting to keep things interesting. And he starts with the sheer number of podcasts that there are now, saying having a good show is no longer good enough. Having a great show is no longer good enough. If you want to survive in the mind share of listeners, you need differentiation. And that is just as true for authors as for podcasters, YouTubers, TikTokers, whatever. The good news is that your differentiation can be you. As I've said many times, being a podcaster, it is really about the host over the long term. I mean, some people find they enjoy the guest and they'll buy the book or they'll enjoy that particular interview, but people come back to podcasts because they connect with something with the host, and people come back to your books because they connect with your author voice. And so the differentiation and the mind share of your listeners, your readers, you have to find it somehow. Now, regular listeners will know I've questioned ending the show over the years several times, worried that I wasn't useful anymore or that my voice no longer mattered where there were so many podcasts on similar topics. But after your wonderful feedback and the fact that the show still gets lots of downloads every week, I mean, it's not Tim's number of downloads, but it's over 10 million. So that's still a lot. And of course, the growth in my Patreon community is probably the most encouraging thing. And so I don't worry about that anymore. I know I have a place in the author sphere as such. And now it is unlikely that any of us will have a podcast as big as Tim's or sell as many books as the 4-Hour Work Week. But that's okay, because I am not Tim Ferriss. You are not Tim Ferriss. I am Jo Penn, and you are whoever you are. And you're here because you find my take on the publishing industry is still useful in some way. And when it is not anymore, you will go elsewhere, and I find myself at peace with that. And when enough of you go elsewhere and it's very clear that it's not worth doing this anymore, then I will also turn off my microphone. Who knows when that will be? At the moment, I'm still going. But good thing in Tim's article, he asks some questions of himself, including, if I get to do this for another decade, or if I had to do this for another decade, what new rules might I create to keep it interesting? And you could also say to keep it sustainable, or to keep it being something I want to keep doing. And I think this, if I get to do this for another decade, or if I had to do this for another decade, is worth asking for anything. Your job, your writing, your social media, your podcast, whatever you do. And of course, we all have different ideas of what this means. I have already implemented one of these rules. So a few years ago, I used to say yes to a lot of pitches. And when traditional publishing started pitching me every day, sometimes I would get carried away and be like, oh yeah, it'd be great to have this famous person on the show. But what I've found is that the famous people are actually not the ones who care about my audience. And I now frequently get pitched by more famous authors and bigger names. And most of the time I turn them down because I choose to talk to people who are interested in serving you, my audience. And I choose people whose information I think would serve you better, because that is the point of the show. I also know from downloads that famous people do not have loads of downloads. Like it's just not what works with podcasting. It really is about helpful information and useful information and things that resonate. So yeah, I think that's so important. And I chose to do that a while ago. I also chose to have people on that I enjoy talking with, and checking in with my friends while you listen in can be useful too, since my friends are often authors who've been in the industry a while. And so I have to make the interviews time that I find interesting or useful or fulfilling, as well as thinking that it will serve you, my audience. But the point is to stop and take time to consider what might need to change. Even if you're really successful, you cannot be a slave to the algorithm, to the media, to your audience for the long term. You have to put in some circuit breakers sometimes. Circuit breakers as in you need to stop. Stop, step away. It is an old adage about the small business. You have to work on the business, not just in the business. And to work on your business, you often have to step outside of it for a bit. Sometimes that means getting away physically. So I know going away can really help getting out of your routine at home. And I had this realization about moving to Wednesday. Again, it seems so basic, and yet it felt like a completely different world I was stepping into. I had this realization while we were in Bruges in Belgium last week. I was talking to Jonathan and I was saying, I just feel this lack of freedom. I feel like I'm just overcommitted, especially at the weekend. And then I was like, what do I do at the weekend? Oh, I do the podcast. Why don't I move it? You don't need to burn it all down. You can just move the show from a Monday to a Wednesday. So this question is for you. If you feel like you really need a change, or if your routine is too much, or your workload is too much, or you're eating into time you need for rest and recovery or family or whatever, can you schedule time to take time out? You don't need to change anything straight away, because sometimes that answer is not clear. But can you schedule at least some time out to think about what you need and how things might change? Maybe it's as simple as moving the day that you deliver something. I wonder if some of you are thinking I'm completely bonkers in considering that this is such a big deal. Or maybe you do think this is a big deal. I would love to know. Anyway, that is the first tip. Take time out to question what you're doing. 2. Learn to pivot if you want to keep going long term. So I love talking to authors who've been doing this career for a long time. And in December 2025, in episode 839, I talked to Jennifer Probst, the New York Times bestselling romance author of more than 60 books, about why some authors build decades-long careers while others vanish after one breakout hit. Jennifer has been through the indie gold rush, the fallout, traditional deals, Kickstarter, all of it. And I asked her how she thinks about how everything keeps changing. And we start with marketing, but it goes much further than that in this clip. But in terms of just how we, for example, how we do marketing, or, I mean, now obviously as we record this, TikTok is still a thing, and we can see maybe generative AI search coming on the horizon and agentic buying. But a decade ago, it might have been different, like more Facebook ads or whatever. And then before that, it might have been something else. So there's always things changing along the way.
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, and it is a very oversaturated market. They talk about, I don't know if it's like 2010 to 2016, maybe about of like the gold rush, because that was where you can make a lot of money as an indie. And then we saw the total fallout of so many different things. And I feel like I've gone through so many ups and downs in the industry, but I do love it because the longer you're around, I feel like you learn how to pivot if you want this career. You learn how to write differently or whatever you need to do to keep going. You know what I mean? In different aspects with the changes. To me, that makes the industry exciting. Again, I feel perspective is a big thing, but I have had to take a year to kind of rebuild when I was out of contract with a lot of things. And I've had to say, okay, what do you see on the horizon now? Where is the new foundation? Where do you want to restart? And maybe like sometimes it takes a year or two to be like, maybe I won't be making big income and I cut back, but then you're back in it because again, it takes a while maybe to write a few new books or whatever, or write a pen name or however you want to pivot your way back into the industry. Or like you were saying, diversifying. And I did a lot of nonfiction stuff because that's a big thing for my calling. So I put that into the primary for a while. So I think it's important for authors to maybe not just have one thing. And when that one thing goes away, you're scrambling. It's good to have a couple of different things that okay, this genre is dead, or this thing is dead, or this isn't making money. Let me go to this for a little while until I see new things on the horizon.
I love that from Jennifer because there are always new things on the horizon, and we try new things and we pivot and we bring in other streams of income as some drop off, and we go again and we keep creating. Authors with longevity are authors who pivot over their careers. They may lament the end of one era only for a little bit, but they don't stop. They find a new way forward. 3. Set a sustainable pace and don't build reader expectations you can't deliver on. Kevin J. Anderson is one of the most productive writers alive, with hundreds of books, most of which he writes with dictation while out hiking, and he has been on this show many times. In January 2025, in episode 791, we talked about building a long-term author business and how authors need to be careful about setting reader expectations around pace of releases.
Now, again, we get back to the longevity of a career. It is exhausting to write lots of books a year, and most people can't keep doing that for 20 years or 30 years. That's one of the reasons, especially indie authors, where readers expect you to write several books a year. Some indie authors I know are writing a book a month. I couldn't do that for any long period. Well, I couldn't do that probably for a single year. But you start building expectations, and when you fail to meet those expectations, they will leave you very quickly. That's why you should have plan Bs. If you really, really can't stand writing your steampunk vampire romance series after book number 29, well, make sure that you have some other series you're starting and building up. And well, Hugh Howey's got several series that are going, and lots of authors that are like Michael Anderle has all kinds of series, and Craig Martell has all kinds of series. And you don't just put all your eggs in one basket, because you need to have plan B and plan C and to get to circle around to what I started with.
So whatever cadence you choose for your books, your email newsletters, or your podcast, or your social media, choose a pace you can still be keeping up in a decade, because this is a long-term career, and longevity in the market is one of the most important things. It is better to pace yourself than burn out. 4. Don't try to do it all, and try to identify the fear that might be driving your choices. I couldn't do an episode on sustainability without Becca Syme. Becca is an author coach who's worked with thousands of writers, the creator of the Better Faster Academy and the Quit Books and the Quitcast podcast. And in January 2023, in episode 668, at the end of a conversation about intuitive writing, I asked her what authors who sustain long careers have in common. So yeah, in terms of sustainability, let's talk about that, because you coach writers every day. You see writers on every spectrum of every personality type, and people who write differently and release differently and publish differently. So what do you see as your recommendations, or I guess commonalities, for authors who want this sustainable career as a writer for the long term in order not to burn out? What are you seeing in terms of the best way to be sustainable?
Conquering the fear that we have that we're not going to get what we want out of the career, like 100%, because the fear is the thing that's driving us to burn ourselves out. The fear that if I don't do it this way, I'm not going to make money. If I don't do it this way, I'm not going to have a long career. If I do, like, I'm going to miss out on something if I don't do absolutely everything. And I think the most important knowledge that we can have is that everyone in this industry who's a nonfiction person, including me, is giving you a perspective on how author life can be done. Every single one of us, not the perspective on how it should be done in order to have success. And if we could just change our expectations of how we look at the people who are helping us, who are being good, helpful people, who are very sure that their way is the correct way, and who should be, again, because like all experts, they've had success doing what they are doing. But the downside is, from someone whose my job is to sit with authors for 45 minutes at a time all day, every day, I see the outcome of the people who have tried to do it all, in quotes, right, with capital letters, and who are burned out because they were doing everything out of a fear place. And I think one of the best things that can happen and what burnout often does is it forces us to reckon with the fact that we were doing all of this because we were afraid my book isn't going to sell. I'm not going to be able to do this. I have this dream that I'm holding on to, and what happens if it doesn't manifest itself? And then we make a lot of our decisions about how much to take on based on fear, and we don't know it because we don't realize that our brains are wired for survival. And so anytime fear kicks in, your brain is like, well, we have to do that, because if you're afraid of it, then that must mean that we need it in order to survive. And we don't. Like, we will survive if our books don't sell. Like, what will happen if in 5 years I have not sold more than $1,000 on every book that I am writing? Like, if each of the individual books that I write have not made more than $1,000, and I have to reckon with what might happen if that happens, because if I don't, that fear is going to drive me to burn out over and over and over and over again. And that is why we're making so many of our decisions, including, do I pay for this class or conference? Do I pay for this book? Do I spend money on this advertising? Do I hire this expert consultant? So many of us are making those choices out of fear, and we don't realize it. And that's why when we do our like public live coaching, and whenever I'm at a conference, I'm always listening for, but what are you afraid is not going to happen? Or what are you afraid is going to happen? Because if we don't deconstruct that part of yourself and calm your survival mechanism down, you're going to continue over and over again to make those decisions out of fear, and you're going to not listen to your intuition because you think it's risky to listen to it. And so I really think, and some of this might include therapy for some of us, I'm just going to acknowledge, like, some of us have trauma around not getting what we want or around not actualizing our desires. And we can't just talk ourselves into letting the fear go. But some of us do just need to consistently confront the fear and make a plan for what happens, and then act in spite of that fear, because we are not making good decisions when we are in survival mode.
So yes, Becca is very wise and also pretty hardcore with her advice sometimes. So if you feel like you are trying to do it all and you're on the edge of burning out, can you identify the fear beneath what you're doing? 5. Question what still serves you, especially as things continue to change. Sometimes we keep doing things the same way, even when it's clear that things have changed. What is lost if we give things up? What is gained? And what kind of game do you want to play? In episode 845, Claire Taylor, humour and mystery author, certified Enneagram coach, talks about how social media has changed and why she gave it up. But one thing I know will have perked up people's ears is the I left social media. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, this was a move that I could kind of feel coming for a while. Like I didn't like what it did to my attention. And even when I wasn't on it, there was almost like a hangover of being on it where my attention just did not feel as sharp and focused as it used to be back before social media became what it was or what it is. And I was just asking the questions of what is lost if I leave, what is gained if I leave, and really looking at what is social media doing for me today? Because I think sometimes we will hold on to what it was doing for us and try to keep squeezing out more and more of what it was, but it has changed so much. You know, there's almost no places where there's sufficient organic reach, and it's all pay to play, and you can see that pay to play going up in price. And I looked at the numbers for my business. My Kickstarter was a great place to look because they track so much traffic sources. And I was like, okay, that's how much I'm getting from social media when I advertise and promote my projects. Can I let that go to get my attention back and to make my life feel more settled? And I decided, yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some things money can't buy. So,
well, that is the thing. Sometimes it's not about the money, but in terms of, I like your question, what is lost and what is gained? You said that it's only pay to play and there's no organic reach. I think there is some people don't pay to play, but they are able to play the game of whatever. So TikTok, for example, you might not have to pay money yet, but you do have to play their game. You do have to pay with your time.
Absolutely.
Rather than money. So I agree with you. I don't think there's anywhere that you can literally just like post something and it actually hits the people who follow you.
Right, exactly. And I mean, yeah, TikTok currently, if you really play the game, sometimes you'll be picked, right? But that pick me energy is not really my jam. And also, you know, we can see the trend, right? This won't last. It's organic for now. You can play the game for now, but TikTok would be crazy not to change it so that they make more money off that. So eventually everything becomes pay to play. And I think so. Just TikTok is fun, but for me, it's addictive. And I took it off my phone years ago because I would do the infinite scroll on TikTok because there's so much candy there. And then I would wake up the next morning just with my mood not where I wanted it to be, energy low. I just really saw a correlation. And so, yeah, I was like, I'm not the person to pay to play or to play the game here. And I'm not even convinced that the pay to play on certain social media networks is even legit anymore. So, because I'm like, well, who's holding them accountable for tracking all of this? But you can kind of see the correlation in your sales. And anyway, it just wasn't for me. And my life I feel so much better on a daily basis off of it. So that's definitely something I have not regretted even for a second.
Now, to be clear, we're not saying you should give up social media. That's not necessarily the answer, but it's about questioning how things make you feel and what you can sustain and how you want to spend your time. Now, I did question, once again, whether to give up this show entirely, but it is an important part of my creative body of work. And quite frankly, I reach more people with this podcast than I do with my books. And I still love talking to people and I learn with every episode and it underpins my business. I don't do much social media though. I learn about AI things on X. I mostly lurk on X and I do post photos and things on Instagram, but I don't do much else. You have to decide what is right for you, but also what is right for you might change over time because everything is changing. If we have a long-term career or a long-term anything, things will change. We change and we will need to move on sometimes, or at least question whether it is still working in the way it used to. Which leads us on to 6. Consider different approaches to creativity. It doesn't have to be every day or every week. In April 2026, in episode 858, I talked to Sarah Rosette, USA Today bestselling mystery author and co-host of the Wish I'd Known Then podcast, about low-key marketing and a more seasonal approach or a phased approach to podcasting as well as writing. Although I must say, I had forgotten about your Mystery Books podcast, and going to seasonal. I mean, I also had my second podcast, Books and Travel, which is also now on a kind of hiatus, but going to a seasonal approach is actually really interesting. Do you find that listeners come back to that podcast?
Yes. And it surprises me because I've always thought you have to be weekly with a podcast to gain any traction at all, which I think is the best way to do it. You can build an audience quickly then, but I just knew I couldn't sustain that. So when I set out, I started out with maybe 7 to 10 episodes, and I did them each year has had a season, and I do 5 to 10 episodes, and readers find it. And I have, highlighted specific books. I think maybe they're searching for a podcast about the Thursday Murder Club or something like that. And so they find it that way. And I get downloads, just steady downloads, throughout the year. And I don't do much. I do some Pinterest pins for that. And that's about all I do. I mean, this is like one of those things we were talking about. It's like the kind of low key marketing that's kind of low threshold, but it does work. And I think it's just, if your readers are looking for stuff to listen to about the topic you write about, it could be a good way to do some low cost kind of long tail marketing. But yeah, I love it. I keep doing it because I love it.
And that just seems more sustainable to me. I don't like doing everything every day or every single week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me either. I like switching it up. And I do enjoy the different phases of writing. I like the research, and then I like doing I don't like the drafting that much. But once I get a draft done, I like the editing. And then when it comes time to promote it, or do whatever I'm going to, like a special edition or whatever, I enjoy that part, like finding what I'm going to use for the interior photos and stuff, and just things like that. I enjoy each phase, and I like switching it out.
Yeah, well, I think that's really good. And so some people think this writer's life is you write new words every single day and you manage your ads every single day. Like, that seems to be what some people do, but that's certainly not us, is it?
No. And that's great if you want to do that. I just don't want to. And I think we've come to the point now where each person can do this as they want. And hopefully people don't feel the pressure to meet these self-imposed deadlines or parameters that they don't exist. There's no rules for writing or publishing. You can do whatever you want.
So I am definitely a seasonal creator. I don't write every day. I never have. I binge write when a book emerges, or binge create. As I record this, I'm working on the treatment and the trailer for what is now called Cathedral Zero. I don't know if I've actually told you that. That's what I was calling Reborn. It's now called Cathedral Zero, a positive futurist sci-fi feature film that I'm entering into the Future Vision X Prize in the next week or so. And then I will move on to the next project, because I do these things in batches or binging, and then I move on. I also love Kickstarter launches for this reason. They feel much more sustainable and a big push for marketing, because it just focuses the mind, and then again, you can move on. Now, my Books and Travel podcast is still on hiatus. That is something that I still feel the pull of. I have not let that go entirely because, I don't know, it still pulls at me. And maybe with my Gothic Cathedral non-fiction memoir book at some point, which will be coming along, I may still resurrect that podcast at some point. And of course, this show remains weekly, but the Wednesday shift will hopefully help keep it this way. I can't see me going seasonal with this, because the weekly news and thoughts on the industry really is a sort of more regular thing. But never say never. The main thing is to consider seasonality, or consider these sort of phased or binge approaches to your work, rather than trying to do exactly the same thing week in, week out, every month, every year, because that may just be too much. 7. Creative humans evolve. Build a body of work for the long term. Ros Morris first came on the show in 2011, and in March 2026 we talked about her memoir, we talked about discovery writing and slow, sustainable book marketing. Ros is an award-nominated literary author and former best-selling ghostwriter, and she's also an editor and she does lots of things. And I always appreciate her perspective since she has been doing this far longer than I have. Do you still actively choose indie for a particular reason?
I do, but I really like building my own body of work, and I'm now experienced enough to know what I do well, what I need advice with and help with. I mean, we don't do all this completely by ourselves, do we? We bring in experts who will give us the right feedback if we're doing a new kind of genre that's new to us. I choose indie because I like the control, because I began in traditional publishing. I was making books anyway for other people. So I just learned all the trades and how to do everything to a professional standard. I love being able to apply that to my own work. I also love the way that I can decide what I'm going to write next. If I was traditionally published, I would have to really do something that fitted with whatever the publisher would want of me. And that isn't necessarily where my muse is taking me or what I've become interested in. I think creative humans evolve throughout their lives. They become interested in different things, different themes, different ways of expressing themselves. I mean, I began by thinking I would just write novels, and now I found myself writing memoirs as well. And that shift would have been difficult if someone else was having to make me fit into their marketing plans or what their imprint was known for. But because I've built my own audience, I can just bring them with me and say, you might like this. It's still me. I'm just doing something different.
Inspiring words from Ros there. It's still me. I'm just doing something different. And indeed, I'm a very different Jo from the new author who started this podcast back in March 2009. I have evolved, and this show has evolved, and this is not the end. It is a new phase. And it's funny because it's just a shift of 2 days in the release schedule, but it also breaks a habit for you listening and for me creating. It changes a time slot in the week, and that in itself can be a way to change energy, change direction, shift what matters and how we do things. So that's what I want to leave you with today. A question about how shifting something, even something small, might make a big question to your creative body of work, the quality of time you have for yourself or your family. And I would love to know what you think about today's episode and what we covered and the tips, as well as your thoughts on the shift to Wednesdays. So please leave a comment on the show notes or the YouTube channel, or email me, joanna@thecreativepenn.com, or I might see you in the Patreon community at patreon.com, patreon.com/thecreativepenn. I will see you here next Wednesday, so happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You can find the backlist episodes and show notes at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. And you can get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on Facebook and X at The Creative Penn, or on Instagram and Facebook at JFPennAuthor. Happy writing, and I'll see you next time.